Alright, gentlemen, this week for deliberate practice we're going to be talking about breaking dependencies, or you can think of it as basically substitutes, fakes, stubs. We'll talk about all the various types of ways to break dependencies, but the idea is that we have some kind of stand-in object rather than the real thing. So first object we're going to talk about is a fake. It's an object with a simplified implementation. A good example of this is I have a RabbitMQ testing library. It's a NuGet package, and it's just a fake implementation. It's just a really dumb implementation of RabbitMQ that allows me to test certain things like putting messages on, taking messages off. It's a fantastic way of not having to create substitutes, but being able to put some kind of dummy object in there. As you can see here, we've got an example. Let's say we've got a fetch user use case, which uses a fetch user repository. So instead of using the real one that goes to SQL, we could make a fake one that uses some kind of in-memory list. Here's some code. By the way, this is all in the TDD manual. It's starting around, page 28. So you're more than welcome to go look at this outside of the video too. So here I've got a fake repository. I've got an accounts list. News it up with some initial state. Fetch user is going to return that. Add user is going to just check to see if the user exists, and if it does, not do anything. If it doesn't, add the user, and there's my interface. Obviously, interfaces are quite key to being able to do any kind of pretend object creation. The next one we're going to talk about is a stub. So this is where NSubstitute's quite interesting in the fact that it's a stub and I think a mocking library in one. So this example's around the character copy karta. Oh, before we get there, a stub's an object that holds predefined data and uses it to respond to a method calls during a test run. So back to the karta. The character copy karta is really simple. It's just there to get us comfortable with the idea of NSubstitute before we move on to the more fun one. But you can see here we've got a character copier and a source copier. Copy source. Oh, sorry. Character copier and a source. And the idea here is that basically we're using two mock objects, just one to output information and the other to receive information. So in this case, the copy source is a stub. It's got a predefined list of information that's going to return. The idea here is that it has an array of characters, and those characters are read out one at a time, once per method call. Got some code here. I'm going to show you my implementation anyway. It's not like it's a secret. The whole idea is just literally getting comfortable with substitutes. Next we have mocks. Mocks are cool in the fact that they're not returning information. They're just registering that a method was called. They can be dangerous because you can leak a lot of your internal implementation details into your test, often resulting in some kind of temporal coupling in the test, knowing that things had to be called in certain orders in order for that test to pass. So the idea here is that we've got a reset password use case, and we've got some kind of email service. And this is a really useful time to use mock. I don't want to send a real email. Don't really probably want to make a fake even. I just want to know that this send message was called. If I want to get a bit more detailed, I could say this send message was called with a specific piece of information having been passed through. That would allow me to understand, not only the behavior, but that the specific state that I was looking for came through. In fact, I would often say that as you get more comfortable with the concept of mocks, you could probably avoid most of the behavioral assertions and just check state, knowing that the state flowed through the organization of that code in the expected manner, rather than certain method calls were performed. And ultimately there, you're probably looking at one or two methods. If you're testing more than that in a test, you're probably testing too many things. Talk a little bit about leaking those details. I call it the Leaky abstraction trap. Asserts that methods were called in a specific order, making it hard to change the internal structure without refactoring all of your tests. You will probably come to hate TDD at some level if you fall into this trap. I was on a project in Oman, and one of the senior guys there that I was working with from Oman, pretty bright guy, but really gravitated towards the more behavioral type of assertions, and because that's what you tend to do when you start learning TDD. And towards the end of the project, he had a little bit of a problem refactoring some of the code, but you know, it's a lesson we all got to learn. Definitely been there myself too many times. Here we go. We've got a reset password use case, code sample. There's a test, so basically asserting that it received a message. arg.any is just saying, hey, any message came through. I could say an arg.is and check properties on the message. Or you can use an arg.do, and that wouldn't necessarily be set up in the assert, that'd be set up in the arrange. And an arg.do is useful for capturing the state that flows through that message call. All right, the Karta here. So we've got a really simple Karta designed to allow us to explore substitutes, well, in this case mocks and stubs, called NSubstitute. So we've got a copier class. This is concrete, this is real, and it takes in two dependencies. It takes in an iSource and an iDestination. The source is a substitute that feeds information through because it's been configured as a mock. Sorry, no, it's been configured as a stub. The other side's configured as a mock. Stub sends information, mock receives the calls. So it's been configured as a stub, and it's going to pass characters through into the destination. And the copier is just responsible for orchestrating those two behaviors. And basically, it's going to copy from source to the destination until it reaches a new line character. I've got a link to the NSubstitute documentation here. It's full of wonderful and very useful examples. I can say it's well documented. I've used a few other libraries in the past. I haven't been overly impressed with them. This one works pretty well for me. So the idea here is I'm going to create my source through a substitute. For iSource, and it's going to basically configure the read character to return a bunch of data that's been passed in. So it's going to configure it to return this array of characters. Every request will return a new one until it gets to the last character, and then it will just continuously return that next character. So I new up the set, I tell it to copy, and then I basically assert that read character was done twice, and then write character was done once, with the expected character, in this case A. Then I've got copy many characters. All I'm basically doing is I've got one, now I'm working to many. It's that one-to-many kind of pattern. Get it working for the singular example, then get it working for the many example. You may have a few more testing getting here, because at the end of the day, this isn't a straightforward solution. You know, if you want to do it one without a new line and then one with a new line, that's great. You probably just refactor the same test to make that happen, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So this test is just around making sure that it can read multiple characters, so I'm going to get the same read and writes that I was expecting. And in this case, I'm just saying check any character. I'm more interested in that it was received 4 times. I could write 4 different received asserts with A, B, C, and D, but that I think that's a little bit over the top in this scenario. I could maybe check the beginning and the end, A and D. You know, that's maybe a little bit more integral. Like I said, it was just really an exercise in getting comfortable with it. And you can see the destination doesn't have anything stubbed out. There's no like, oh, hey, return some data. It's just about receiving data. So copier implementation takes these in. I throw in arguments, exceptions. I had 2 tests in there. I took them out for simplicity's sake so we could just focus on the substitute stuff. Read a character. While it's not the new line, write the character and continue doing that. Pretty straightforward and easy. All right, so back to the Karta. Obviously, I want you to start here. Like I said, there's some documentation here on NSubstitute if you get stuck. And then we're going to move on to my favorite, the CSV file Karta. You will not find this anywhere on the web, and if you do, let me know. This was a whole homebrewed Karta between me and my old right-hand man. back when I worked in South Africa at a company called Chilisoft. This came out of a real-world production scenario through which, for the most part, these were kind of the general steps taken to get the code out. There's nothing quite like the pressure of your plane leaving in 3 hours until then to find some very creative and unique ways to use your principles to write good code. Let me just say that. Anyway, the idea here is that you've got an interface, the iFile system, it's been provided, and there's a customer class that you're going to be using as well. So you can take these two pieces as provided code. You do not need to write tests for them. Well, actually, they are in NuGet packages, but I don't remember. Oh, yeah, right here. You can just install that. You don't actually have to copy and paste the code in. So you can treat it as a proper third-party library. So the idea here is your team maintains a system. You need to dump customer data out of some data store into a CSV format for a nightly job that imports the data into a CRM. So basically, it's an extract and import type process. You do not need to worry about writing headers. Please do not write headers to your files. You do not need to worry about cading for commas in your data. Do not worry about any edge cases. Just take the data and write it to a file. That's all I'm telling you to do here. I've given you a hint because I find people often struggle with this initial composition, how things should be hooked up and working. So basically, you've got a CSV file writer that's going to take an iFile system, and it's going to also take a customer object. So the constructor is going to take the iFile system. This is the thing that's substituted out, and it's got this nice method called writeLine. It takes a file name and a line. Your customer object is going to be passed through some method, maybe like dump to file system or write CSV file. So it's not going to be part of the constructor. It'll just come through in the public method you expose. So you have to finish the first requirement before you can move to the next. And normally, in a more synchronous manner, I would review your implementation, offer you feedback, and then allow you to proceed or not proceed. We're having issues with, and the other thing to remember is you're following solid around the solid principles while trying to do this. So they're having problems. It needs to be restarted. So they want to amend it so you're only writing in batches of 10. So now before in the first one you were writing everything. Now you've got to chunk this up into batches of 10 and go about figuring out how to test things. You should be paying close attention to the open-closed principle. Avoid using default arguments. Please do not do that in methods, and think best how to extend a class's behavior. Don't change its internals. Use something like a decorator pattern and augment what it's capable of doing. Third requirement, now you need to export large batches of 15,000, so it's just a small iteration on the previous requirement. In fact, this should take you a matter of maybe a few minutes if you've done the second requirement thinking of that open-closed type principle. Fourth requirement, this one really stretches the various letters of solid. So you now need to dedupe this information. And at this stage, I'm really expecting you to be able to do this in such a way that you're not tinkering the internals too much. You may have to refactor slightly to pass through some kind of deduplication strategy, but that's understandable at this stage. Or you may not. Maybe you write another decorator and it handles that. I don't know. And finally, my favorite part of this karta, when you get to the end, you have 15 minutes to complete this requirement. The reason being is if you followed all the solid principles, this will be super easy, like one of the previous ones. If you haven't, this is pretty much next to impossible to do in 15 minutes. And that's kind of the point, is you're under the gun. If you've written good code, that last little thing just before you head out the door is not going to be too hard. Maybe put you on edge, but you'll get it done. So the idea here is that you need to write two batches of files now. The current CSV is generated, and a debug set to 20. So I need to be able to set one in 1500, and I need to set 15,000, and another instance of the files at 20 per file. Here's the catch. You can create new classes only. You cannot in any way modify any existing code to solve this. at all. If you have to touch one letter in any of your existing classes, you've not successfully completed this kata. I know it can be long, but I hope you all have fun. I hope you enjoy it. If you do know substitutes, great. Maybe you can expand your knowledge, and if you don't, this is a great opportunity to get in and really start to see their value. All right, go team!